New Mexico Territory, 1874. The wind kicked up dust across the dry ground of Silver Rock as 14-year-old boys laughed too loud behind the church, their voices bouncing off white clapboard walls. Laurel Norrin kept her chin down, fingers clenched in the faded fabric of her dress. She stepped through the church doors anyway, shoulders square. Like her mama used to say, you walk like you belong, no matter what you wear. But the hem of her dress barely grazed her ankles, fraying at the seams, and the color had long since faded to a washed-out gray. It had belonged to her mother once, and even then it had been patched. She must have dug that thing out of a barn. One of the boys snickered as she passed the pews. Laurel pretended she did not hear it. She slid into the back row, eyes fixed on the altar, her hands curled into fists in her lap. The church was full today, pastor's daughter getting baptized, and Laurel knew she should have stayed home. But she could not keep hiding out in the hills forever. She had to face them sometime, her belly twisted with something sharp and hot. Ever since her father died last spring, the town had looked at her different, first with pity, then with distance. After months of living alone in the cabin up Dry Creek, they looked at her like she was a ghost. "Laurel," someone whispered, a little softer. "Your dress is—" She stood before the words could sting any deeper. The wooden pew scraped. She walked out with her back straight, the sun nearly blinding outside. She did not see the cowboy until he stepped down from his horse near the water trough. He was tall, maybe in his late 20s, with dust on his boots and sun in his hair. His shirt was worn at the shoulders and his hat was pulled low, shadowing his eyes. But his gaze caught hers like a hook. "You all right?" he asked, nodding toward the church. Laurel blinked. "Fine." He glanced toward the doors, then back to her. "Look to me like you were brave." A flush rose to her cheeks. "I do not need anyone feeling sorry for me." "Was not pity, miss," he said, voice steady. "It was respect." She hesitated. No one had looked at her like that in a long time. Like she mattered. Like she was not just the girl in the tattered dress. He extended a hand. "Name's Paxton Zeller. Just rode in from the Pecos Trail." "Laurel Norrin," she said, slowly reaching for his hand. His grip was warm, firm. He did not look away from her dress or mutter something under his breath. Instead, his eyes stayed steady on hers, slow and sure. "That dress," he said, tipping his head. "It says you know how to hold on when things get hard. That kind of strength's beautiful." Laurel blinked again, not sure what to say. No one had ever called her beautiful before, not even when she had new clothes and a warm home. She lowered her eyes. "It is just a dress." "Maybe." Paxton's voice softened. "But I have seen women with silk and gold in their ears, and not one of them looked near as fine as you do now." Her breath caught. He stepped back, touching the brim of his hat. "I will be around a while, working stock for old man Riggins. If you ever want company that does not care about dresses, come find me." He turned and walked toward the livery, leaving Laurel standing in the sun, heart thumping in her chest, hands trembling. The next morning, she saddled her mule and rode out to the edge of the Riggins ranch. Paxton was there, fixing fence wire in the heat. He looked up when he saw her, no surprise in his face, just a smile that spread slow and easy. "Brought you some biscuits," she said, holding out a small cloth bundle. "That's so." He wiped his hands and took them, unwrapping one. "You make these?" She nodded. He took a bite, chewed, then grinned. "Best thing I have tasted in weeks." Laurel smiled for real then, and it felt strange on her face, like something waking up after too long a sleep. From that day on, she rode out to see him every few mornings, always bringing something small: bread, preserves, once even a cracked book of poems her mother had left behind. They talked about little things: ranch work, the land, the way the sky turned orange before the evening storms. He never asked about her past, and she never asked about his. Not yet. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she sat beside him on the fence rail. The cattle were quiet down the hill. He passed her a tin cup of coffee. "You always this quiet?" he asked. "No," she said. "I just do not like talking if I ain't got anything worth saying." He laughed softly. "Then when you do talk, I will listen." She looked at his hands, rough, cracked from work. He was not like the boys in town. He did not talk to fill silence or look at her like she was broken. "Why are you really here, Paxton?" she asked. He looked out toward the horizon. "Had some bad luck up north. Thought maybe it was time to start again somewhere quiet." Laurel nodded. "I know what that feels like." He turned to her then, eyes serious. "You ever think about leaving Silver Rock every day? You ever think about leaving with someone?" Her heart skipped. "Are you asking?" He nodded once. "I am." Laurel looked down at her hands. The same dress clung to her frame, threadbare and faded. She had nothing else. No family, no dowry. Just a name and a stubborn heart. But when she looked at Paxton, she saw something she had not seen in a long time: hope. "I do not have anything," she whispered. "Just this old dress and a half-broke mule." Paxton leaned closer, voice low. "You have more than that. You have courage. You have kindness, and you have my heart, Laurel." She stared at him, stunned. "You mean that?" "I would marry you tomorrow if you would let me." For the first time in months her eyes filled, but she did not look away. "Then ask me again tomorrow." He smiled. "I will," and she believed him. The next morning was cooler than most, the air sharp with the scent of juniper and last night's rain. Laurel stood at the edge of her porch, bare feet pressed into the damp plank boards, a tin basin of water cooling beside her. She ran a comb through her hair, one slow stroke at a time, trying not to tug when it caught on knots. Her hands weren't shaking like they had yesterday. A blue jay scolded her from the cottonwood tree near the creek, and she looked up at the sound, lips curving slightly. The world felt different, like something had shifted in the soil under her boots. She couldn't name it yet, but it stirred in her chest, something warmer than fear, something steadier than hunger. By mid-morning, she was on the trail south, her mule trotting careful over the rocky path that twisted through the hills. She didn't wear the gray dress. Instead, she'd pulled out one of her mama's old work skirts, faded but sturdier, and knotted a kerchief over her braid. There was no need to pretend at finery. Paxton had seen her without it and hadn't flinched. She found him near the east pasture, sleeves rolled to the elbow, driving a post into the earth with slow, even strikes. The sound of it echoed over the dry grass. He didn't look up until her mule snorted and shifted. "Thought you might not come," he said, resting the sledge against his leg. "I said I would," Laurel replied, easing down from the saddle. "You always take folk at their word." "I reckon I try to," he said, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "Sometimes it works out." "I brought you something again," she said, untying the cloth bundle from the back of her saddle. "It's not food this time." He took it gently when she handed it to him, unfolding the linen to reveal a single stitched handkerchief, the thread uneven but honest. A sprig of purple thistle curved in the corner, embroidered in tiny loops. "I know it ain't much," she said, watching his face. "I've never had anything finer," he said, folding it carefully and slipping it into his shirt pocket. "Did you stitch that yourself?" "Laid awake too long last night," she said. "Hands needed something to do." He leaned back against the post, quiet a moment. "Thistle's a strong flower," he said finally. "Grows where not much else will." She nodded. "Mama taught me that, said it was a stubborn thing like her." Paxton's gaze traced the horizon for a moment, then returned to her. "You talk about her like she's still near." "I do that sometimes," Laurel said. "Helps me feel less alone." He didn't speak for a while after that. The air between them stretched but didn't strain. When he finally moved, it was to walk toward the nearby sycamore where a canteen hung from a branch. He poured 2 cups from it before offering one to her. "Tell me something real," he said. Laurel took the cup, the metal cool against her fingers. "Real like what?" "Something you've never said out loud." The wind stirred the grass and a hawk wheeled high above them. She stared into the distance, toward the ridge where the sun caught the bones of an old wagon wheel half buried in sand. "I used to think if I just worked hard enough, people'd forget what we didn't have," she said finally. "But it don't work like that, does it?" He shook his head once. "No, it don't. I watched my father try that near every year till he died," she said. "He kept thinking the next harvest would save us, that if we just held on a bit longer, something good would come." Paxton's voice was low. "Maybe it finally did." She glanced at him, startled by the softness in his tone. He set his cup down in the grass. "My mother used to say, you can lose everything but your word and your hands. I lost plenty, but I still got both." Laurel was quiet, watching the calluses along his knuckles, the way his fingers moved when he spoke, like his hands had never learned to be still. "I've been thinking," he said, voice steady. "I meant what I said yesterday. About marrying you, I know." His eyes didn't waver. "Then I'll ask you now, proper this time, not in passing." She felt her throat tighten, but she didn't look away. "I want to build something that lasts," he continued, "and I want to build it with you, not out of pity, not out of loneliness, but because I see the strength in you, and I'd be proud to stand beside it." Laurel set her cup down carefully. The breeze tugged a loose strand of hair across her cheek. She tucked it behind her ear. "I don't have a preacher," she said. "I talked to Mrs. Coker this morning," he said. "She said her brother rides circuit through here next week. He's ordained." Laurel folded her arms across her chest, bracing herself against the flood of feelings that rose sharp and sudden. "You've already planned it." "I've already decided," he said. "But I'll wait till you do too." She stepped closer, her boots in the patch of sunlight between them. "What if I'm not sure yet? Then I'll come back tomorrow, and the day after, however long it takes." Her voice, when it came, barely rose above the wind. "You'd really wait?" "As long as I need to," he said. She looked up at him, her eyes clearer than they'd been in a long time. "Then I suppose you won't have to wait long." The preacher arrived on the Wednesday stage, a lean man with a travel-worn Bible and a voice rough from dust. He stayed in a room above the mercantile, and after supper, Paxton walked him out along the edge of the Riggins land to ask his favor. Laurel wasn't there for the talk, but by morning, word had already passed through the hills that a wedding would be held come Saturday, under the cottonwood beside Dry Creek. Laurel spent the days between in a quiet sort of motion. She didn't rush. There was no trousseau to stitch, no white muslin to hang in the sun. She swept the floor of her father's cabin, gathered wild mint to boil into the washwater, and mended the old quilt that had once sat folded at the foot of her parents' bed. It was slow work, but her hands moved steady, and for the first time in a long while, the silence in the little house felt like it belonged to her. Late Friday, she rode into town with a basket of eggs to trade. Miss Haverly at the store offered her a spool of ivory thread and a length of blue ribbon in exchange. Laurel didn't ask for them, but she took them with a quiet nod and left the basket behind. Outside, the sun hung low and pink behind the church steeple. The boys from last Sunday weren't loitering this time. She tied her mule near the smithy and crossed the street without hurry. On the boardwalk, old Mr. Haskett tipped his hat. She nodded back. No one whispered, no one stared. At the cabin that night, Laurel stood before the cracked mirror nailed above the washstand. She'd pulled her hair back with the ribbon, the ends trailing soft against her shoulder. Her dress was still plain, but the seams had been reinforced, the collar pressed flat. The thread Miss Haverly had given her ran like a pale, fine line along the hem, stronger than it looked. A knock at the door startled her. She stepped out onto the porch, the lantern light behind her stretching long across the dirt. It was Paxton. He didn't look different, still in his same worn boots and trail shirt rolled to the elbow, but something in his eyes had settled, like he'd made a promise to himself and meant to keep it. "I know it's late," he said, "but I couldn't sleep without seeing you." Laurel didn't answer right away. She stepped down into the yard, arms folded, not cold but needing to hold something close. "I've never seen a wedding," she said. "I have. Once. Up near Cimarron. Bride wore a dandelion crown and laughed through the whole thing." "Why'd she laugh?" "Her husband dropped the ring in the grass," he said, voice low at the edges. "Took him near 10 minutes to find it." Laurel looked up at the stars. "I ain't got a ring." "I do," he said. "Found a silversmith in Mesilla last winter. Didn't know who I was saving it for till now." She turned to him. "Why'd you carry a ring you didn't need?" Paxton shifted his weight, thumb brushing the brim of his hat. "I guess I believed I'd find someone worth giving it to." The wind rustled the grass near the creek. A coyote called from the ridge beyond. Laurel stepped closer until the lantern light touched his shoulder. "You think we'll be happy?" she asked. "I think you'll be stubborn and I'll be tired," he said, smiling just once. "But yes, I think we'll be happy." She reached for his hand. He held it without flinching. "Come early tomorrow," she said. "The preacher don't wait long." "I'll be there before the sun hits the fence line." He walked away slow, and she stood in the yard until his shape disappeared into the dark. When morning came, the sky was washed in pale gold. The cottonwood leaves shimmered in the breeze, and the air carried the smell of earth and creek stone. A handful of folks from town came out: Miss Haverly, the Riggins boys, even Mr. Haskett with his cane and a flask tucked under his coat. No one brought flowers or music, but someone hung a length of white cloth between two trees and the preacher stood beneath it, Bible open in his hands. Paxton waited under the branches. He'd shaved, and his shirt was clean. The silver ring glinted from his pocket. Laurel walked to him with her head high, the blue ribbon trailing from her braid, her hands steady at her sides. They stood together without speaking as the preacher read the words. Laurel didn't tremble. When Paxton slid the ring onto her finger, her eyes didn't leave his. The cottonwood rustled like it approved. When it was done, he kissed her once, slow and sure, and the crowd clapped quiet, respectful. Laurel's fingers stayed curled around his. They didn't linger in town. Instead, they rode back toward the cabin, the sun behind them, the trail wide and clear. Her quilt was folded on the bed. A new chair sat beside the hearth Paxton's doing. That night they sat outside in the dark, her hand resting on his knee, his arm around her waist. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. When he finally said her name, it was the kind of sound that belonged to a home. And when she leaned her head against his shoulder, it was with the trust of someone who had found her place and meant to stay. Above them, the stars blinked steady and bright. And inside the little house, the lantern burned until morning. The first week passed with cool mornings and long, sun-split afternoons. Laurel rose early, her bare feet finding the worn path from bed to hearth without thought. The cabin, once full of silence, now held the soft rhythm of two people learning to live beside each other. Paxton's split would just past sunrise, the thud of axe against log steady as breath. Laurel boiled coffee over the coals, her sleeves rolled and her hands busy. They didn't speak much in those early hours. Words didn't seem necessary. He brought in water, she folded back the quilts. He saddled the mule, she mended the fence gate. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs. One afternoon she found him at the edge of the property, studying the ground with a furrowed brow. He crouched low, fingers trailing along the dry soil. "What are you looking for?" she asked, walking up beside him, her skirts catching on rabbit brush. "Tracks," he said, voice quiet. "Couple of them. Deer mostly, but there's one set I don't like." She crouched beside him, peering down. The prints were shallow but wide, broken grass along the edge. "Boots," she said. "Big ones," he nodded. "Too close to the house for strangers. You think someone's been watching? I don't know yet. Could be a drifter, could be nothing." He stood, brushed dust from his trousers. "But I'll run a line of traps along the back ridge, just in case." That night she double-latched the door. He leaned his rifle near the window before they turned in. They didn't speak about it again, but Laurel noticed how he kept his boots close and his belt hung within reach. By the end of the second week, the garden bed near the cabin had been cleared of weeds, and she'd started turning the soil with a rusted hoe they found beneath the porch. Paxton built a small table out of cedar planks and set it near the window. They ate their meals there now, knees nearly touching. "You ever plant before?" he asked one evening, watching her sort seeds into a tin. "When I was little," she said. "Before the drought came, my mother used to say even the land forgets how to grow if you don't remind it." I reckon she was right. Laurel looked up. "What about you? You ever stay in one place long enough to grow anything?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "I moved too much, never had soil to call mine." She studied him, the way his jaw worked when he was thinking. "You do now." He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his face went still. "I know." The next morning they rode out together to gather stones for a root cellar. She guided the mule along a dry arroyo while he walked beside her, pointing out where the wild onions grew. The sun was high by the time they returned, their hands scraped and their clothes dusted white from the limestone. She poured water into a basin and handed him a cloth. "You're gonna peel if you don't cool off." He dipped the cloth, wiped his neck, then passed it back. "You always boss your husband like this?" "Only when he forgets he's human." He laughed, the sound low and warm. "You've got a sharp tongue, Laurel Norrin. And you've got sunburn on your ears." By the third week, the cellar walls were waist-high, and the fence had been reinforced with cedar posts. They worked well together, their movements falling into rhythm. She knew when he needed the hammer before he asked. He handed her nails before she reached for them. One evening, as they sat on the porch steps, her knees drawn up beneath her skirt, he cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about winter," he said. She turned toward him. "It'll be lean." "I'll take a drive north before the snow sets in," he said. "There's a ranch near Santa Fe that owes me wages. I can bring back salt pork, flour, maybe even a bolt of wool." She looked down at her hands. "How long would you be gone?" "6 days. Maybe 7. She nodded once, lips pressed tight. "I can manage the place." "I know you can," he said. "But I don't like leaving you with those prints still fresh near the ridge." Laurel stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "We don't get to choose when trouble comes. Only how ready we are for it." Paxton watched her for a moment, then stood and stepped close enough that she could hear the change in his breath. "You're not what I expected," he said. "When I came to Silver Rock, I thought I'd find work and move on. That's all. And now, I can't imagine home without you in it." She looked up at him, her voice steady. "Then come back to it." Their lips met soft, no urgency, just the quiet promise of shared breath. When they parted, she leaned her forehead to his. "I'll keep the fire going," she whispered. "I'll ride back before it dies." That night they lay beneath the quilt she'd mended, their fingers twined in the space between. And outside, the cottonwood leaves turned in the wind, waiting for snow. Paxton left before dawn, the sky still dark enough to hold stars. Laurel stood in the doorway, his coat buttoned to the neck, saddlebag tight behind him. He kissed her once on the forehead, then mounted and rode west without looking back. She watched until the sound of hooves faded. The house was colder without him. The silence different now, emptier, though she kept herself moving. She dug turnips from the back row of the garden, patched the roof where wind had pulled loose a shingle, and smoked strips of rabbit for the cellar. But as the days passed, she found herself listening for hoofbeats too often. The mule brayed once at dusk, and she dropped the kettle, heart leaping, only to find the yard still. On the fourth evening, wind carried the scent of iron and pine down from the ridge. Laurel stepped out with the lantern and circled the perimeter slowly. A broken branch lay near the fence line, freshly snapped. She crouched beside it, fingers brushing the bark. The dirt beneath showed a heel print, deep and deliberate. She returned inside and barred the door. That night, she slept with the shotgun beside the bed and didn't dream. The next morning, she rode into town, the mule carrying a crate of dried herbs to trade. Miss Haverly offered her a bag of oats and half a jar of molasses. As Laurel turned to go, the older woman pressed a folded slip of cloth into her hand, gray wool, hemmed and stitched. "It's nothing fancy," she said, "but it's warm, for when the snow comes." Laurel nodded once, throat thick. "Thank you." Outside, Mr. Haskett waved her down with his cane. "You seen that man of yours yet?" he asked, squinting against the sun. "Not yet," she answered. "Stage came through from the north this morning. Said the bridge at Eagle Pass is near gone, flooded bad, he might be a day behind." Laurel held the reins tighter. "Was anyone hurt?" "Not that I heard, just slow going." She rode home with the mule, picking careful steps. At the cabin, she set the wool cloth beside the bed and lit the fire early. The wind carried ice now, even in the daylight. She kept the shotgun nearby and didn't walk beyond the garden fence. That night, she heard something, branches cracking, low and sharp. She moved to the window and saw a figure at the edge of the yard. Too tall to be Paxton. Too still. She lifted the shotgun and opened the door enough to call out, "I'm armed. You'd best go back the way you came." The figure didn't move for a long moment. Then it turned, stepped backward into the trees, and disappeared. She bolted the door and didn't sleep. At first light, she followed the tracks. They led north, away from the creek, up toward the ridge trail. She found a scrap of rough cloth caught on a fence post, frayed and stained. Whoever had come, they'd known the land, knew when to move and how to vanish. She buried the cloth beneath a stone at the edge of the pasture. The 6th day passed. Then the 7th. Paxton hadn't returned. That evening she sat on the porch, wrapped in the gray wool cloth from Miss Haverly, her fingers tucked beneath. She stared toward the west trail, her breath rising in small clouds. The mule stirred once in the barn, then went still. Finally, as dusk fell into true dark, the sound came, slow hoofbeats, deliberate and close. She stood, heart hammering, and stepped out into the yard. Paxton rode into the clearing, shoulders slumped, coat torn at one sleeve. His face was drawn, a gash across the side of his brow. She ran to him. He slid from the saddle and caught her before she could speak, arms pulling her in close. He buried his face in her neck and breathed in once, deep and shaking. "I thought you were," she began, voice breaking. "Couldn't get through the pass," he said. "Had to double back south, cross near Rasilla. Wagon overturned in the river. I lost the supplies, but I didn't lose the ring." She pulled back, hands on his face. "You're bleeding. Not bad, just tired." "I saw someone," she said, "here 4 nights back, watching." His face changed, jaw tightening. "You sure?" "I know what I saw." He nodded once. "We'll set a trap line tomorrow. I'll sleep by the door tonight." Inside, she washed the cut on his brow with warm water and vinegar, her fingers gentle. He didn't flinch. When she was done, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small pouch. "Didn't bring flour," he said, "but I found this." She opened it. Wildflower seeds wrapped in waxed paper. "For spring," he said. For your garden." She closed the pouch slowly. "You remembered. I remember everything you say." She stood there, holding the seeds, and felt the last of the fear slip from her chest like water down stone. That night, they lay beneath the quilt, her head on his chest, his hand resting along her back. The wind howled outside, but inside the fire burned steady. Months passed. The stranger never returned. The trap stayed empty. The snow came late that year, heavy and clean. Paxton built her a lean-to for seedlings along the south wall, and by March, green shoots pushed through the soil. She planted the wildflowers near the edge of the porch, where the sun lingered longest. By summer, the cabin had new shutters, a second chair, and a bench Paxton carved from pine. Laurel kept the blue ribbon tucked in a cedar box by the bed, and every Sunday she wore the wool cloth Miss Haverly gave her, now stitched with a border of tiny red thread. They didn't speak of loneliness anymore. They didn't need to. Each morning he kissed her temple before stepping outside. Each evening she waited until he was home to light the lamp. They ate side by side, worked shoulder to shoulder, and slept with hands entwined beneath the quilt. And when the thistle bloomed again by the pasture fence, Paxton brought her one, its purple petals bright against the dry grass. She smiled, took it, and pressed it between the pages of the book her mother left behind. They lived quietly but not small. Their days were ordinary, and in that they found a kind of grace, a kind of peace, and in each other they found home. Always.